there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Carl Schmitt's Dictatorship. Today we are looking at Chapter 2, Part 2, Part B. Chapter 2, again's focus was the practice of royal commissioners until the 18th century, and the focus of Part B section, two divided sections. The first one was we broke into two videos last time, and today we're going to break up this part B, the Excursus on Wallenstein as dictator. The example he's going to focus. He said he was going to focus on Wallenstein, and again, this is Wallenstein is the Catholic actor for the Holy Roman Emperor, who was basically organizing the war against the Protestants rebellion. Okay, trying to restore the order of the Catholic control, and particularly that of the emperor's control over the Protestants, those rebelling Protestant states. So let's focus on this. We're going to break it up into two parts. It's Part A and Part B, and we'll focus on A today, and the next video will be the continuation of this. So let us get to it. We'll start. Again, this was all about the question of, this is his historical analysis of the emergence of the question of basically the emergency, what emergency power, emergency actor, the executive power of the state actors using, this is the whole point of dictatorship. The whole dictatorship was the question of executive prerogative for the time of crisis, right? How do you have the extraordinary activity of the sovereign in order to resolve a crisis, and the means and instrumentations of this, right? And the idea of the commissarial issue in the earlier chapters. Now, he's now giving the example of Wallace. He's going to focus wholly in this part on the example of Wallenstein. Why? So let's go to this. As chief of the army, as chief of a huge army, a capo, as one called him at the time, and as one who ignored the rights of the states, knowing on the other hand how to be absolutely independent of his imperial superior, right? So therefore, this is interesting. Wallenstein is chief of army, but he's also what? He's one who's ignored the rights of the states, but also knowing how to be independent of his imperial superior in that sense. Wallenstein has frequently been referred to as a dictator by his contemporaries, no less than later historical traditions. So this is a footnote, and he's going to look at this is that talking about von Hoelzl's book here. The last years of his life, right? And Wallenstein on the Wallenstein in Haberstein Alley, right? It is understandable that the literary and psychological interpretation by Richard Rouge should not wish to relinquish the word dictatorship. Even Moritz Ritzer used the word in a confused general sense. In his German History in the Age of the Counter-Reformation and 30-Year War, he talks, for instance, under the dictatorship of the Spanish delegate Ornate in relation to his commanding style of discussion, discussing questions of imperial policy, of the Swedish dictatorship of Gustav Adolphus in relation to the one-sided conditions he imposed on the Prince Elector of Saxony under threat of open violence, and of the Austrian dictatorship in Europe in his Austrian dictatorship in Europe of his development of historic science, right? In his appreciation of Clifford and his Untertangen. The fall of Wallenstein, right? With respect to Wallenstein's second generalship, he states that Wallenstein acted with too dictatorial power, even to the higher degree than in his first, right? So therefore, this is okay, right? So here we have not come across one of the we have not come across one of the numerous cases in which the term was used as a political catchword. The question, in other words, we have not. This is in other words, dictatorship is used as a catchword. No, dictatorship means authoritarian rule, and others. We this is one. We have not come across one of the numerous cases in which the term was used as a political catchword. The question is rather to what extent military and political powers of Wallenstein justified such a classification. In other words, was was the military powers and political powers of Wallenstein really legitimately call him a dictator in a sense, in the understanding of what dictatorship meant and the other things, right? Is that the use of language has already shifted towards sovereign dictatorship. In other words, the idea that the sovereign dictator. In other words, he's saying that the use what sprang upon the outside world in the form of dictatorial powers was a special kind of autonomy from the commissar, one that contradicted the commissarial character as Baton conceived it. So therefore, the original concept of dictator was an office. It was a commissarial. That's what it means. It was an office inside a state in order to deal with extraordinary things. It was not a state itself. It was not a constitution. It was not a alternative political system. Sovereign dictatorship means it's like a tyranny. It's a different form of government, different type of regime. It is autonomous. In other words, it's an alternative constitution. Okay. In other words, and what's happening is the use of the term dictatorship in the language when the people talk about this often has already shifted away from viewing it of a commissarial office to this idea of a separate regime as an alternative political form in that sense, right? In the state theory of the time, the word was used for the highest military command, which was independent of interventions from the authorities. So therefore, this idea was that the time dictator was basically ultimately gave autonomy from civilian authorities, right? That it was highest military command, which was independent of intervention from. In other words, it was independent, autonomous, had no intervention. This is why, as previously mentioned, Armias called Prince Maurice of von Orange a dictator. Cromwell is often called the same in the capacity as Lord General. And come to Wallerstein, Pufendorf refers to him as a dictator too, right? 57. This is again the commentary on. Let's go through this. The commentary on Swedish affairs, right? The princes complained that the Freelander, Wallander, he goes Wallenstein, um, in his usual, in other words, this is that famous line from Latin, which is translated here as his unusual unlock gone to his head, behaves like a dictator. He submits neither to the emperor's mandates nor to his person when he is not in a good mood. He's not in the mood. At the 1630 Reichstag of Regensburg, the Reichstag of Regensburg complains that or raised about the acts of injustice and oppression perpetuated by the imperial army, and about Freelanders in Freelander, which means again Wallenstein's insolence and dictatorial authority. Camillus. Okay, this is the book. Is the okay? This is the wars of the Sucuro Germanica, the German, basically about the wars between the Germans in that sense, right? This is, in that sense, calls Wallenstein summus supreme commander of imperial authority, right? This is summus consigliere militari imperator, so therefore supreme commander of the imperial army, and says that during his second generalship he demanded an completely unconditional authority, not bound by any rules whatsoever. Yet he does not call him a dictator. In his book, De Rational, on the economy of the state, the rational the rationale of state. Okay. Um, uh, uh, Clementis, Clementis refers to Wallenstein as um, supremus exrictus dux cum summa potentia, the highest military leader endowed with supreme authority. But he conceives him as a tool of imperial power. The Prince Elector of Mainz talks about the yoke of Friedlander's domination, Wallenstein's domination. Apparently, none of these expressions refers to the specific concept in constitutional law. In other words, this is just referring to his power, his authority, not as a term as a legal construct. In other words, they're not referring it to in terms of a body of legal authority in that sense, or an entity under the Constitution. Right? Constitutional law is the legal framework by which states are constituted, okay, are structured, and therefore the institutions of the state are framed. So therefore, it explains their power and this. Therefore, when people are talking about Wallenstein and his actions and his things, they're not talking about his actions and his things as framed in terms of constitutional law, but rather merely of power and activity outside of the question of this, right? So again, as Pufendorf's discussion of this, for Wallenstein's first generalship, there was first of all an imperial inter okay intersects with plan of war. In other words, that this intertimax ex concilio of the war. This overall thing dating from 17 April 1625, by which Wallenstein was appointed capo above all His Imperial Majesty's people who were living at the time in the Holy Roman Empire in the Netherlands. Right. Um, uh, um, the title capo was unusual for the imperial commander in chief, although it was not in general as unusual as Heydrich seems to suggest. Again, 59. This is Heydrich's argument. The book he does that. Any commanding leader would have been called a capo, right? Um, Again, this is Duke Maximus was called Capo della Liga. Examples of Halleck, he points to Halleck himself. Well, Capo again, Capo. This, think of this mafia captains. This is someone who's leading a leader, a capo in charge, right? This is why the word captain comes in, right? Commanding a troop. Um, it only meant that Wallenstein was given the military directive over the imperial troops, according to the general patent of 25th June 1625. Wallenstein was not appointed as commander of the whole imperial army, but only as a commander of troops stationed in the Holy Roman Empire. The troops stationed in the lands of the crown were not under his command. So therefore, in other words, in the lands of the crown, of the Austrian state, the Austrian ruler himself, they were not under his command. Only the armies in the Holy Roman Empire, in a sense, right? According to Halleck, his appointment as commander in chief in June 1626, the exact date is unknown, meant that he became the supreme general of the whole imperial army of the German Reich, in the hands of the of in the lands of the crown and in Hungary. There was no doubt that the army of the Catholic League, the Catholic League, was not under his command. He had to consult with Tilly. He had to liaise with the army of the private. He had to liaise, means have liaison, interact with, right, with the army of the prince electors, and of the princes if circumstances required it. But he had to serve. But he had to serve unconditionally our imperial preeminence with respect and with obedience of our needs, right, as was stated in the imperial instructions of 27 June 1625. published for the first time in Hermann Hoelzl's the Journal of General History in 1884. Right, that correction with corrections in Hoelzl's the history of Wallenstein. So, according to Crop books, Tilly was it Truly in the 30-Year War, and cited words to serve unconditionally and so on are in a strange addition contra Halleck's history of Wallenstein suggests them as genuine, and so too Gwendley's book on Wallenstein. So therefore, this is Wallenstein was not appointed as commander of the Holy Roman Imperial Army. Did I do that right? No, okay. Let me just repeat this. Okay, lays with the principle. Then I started to repeat myself. Sorry, I apologize. We look up here. This is where he took the general thing. We took the league, right? He had lays with this, and he says, and this is where I looked up. It was stationed on the imperial section of this. The imperial appointment of 21 April 1628 clearly illustrates Wallenstein's status and his commissarial character. And in it, Wallenstein was appointed General Oberstein Hauptmann. Okay, this is, let's do this. Colonel General, what is it? Yeah, Colonel General Field Captain. Colonel General Field Captain of all troops that belonged to the Imperial Army and were on the payroll in such a way that he was given authority, preeminence, and prerogatives for all supreme command. He had authority to muster the army, to revise it, to authorize payments through his own signature on the situation and occasion demanded, and to reappoint senior officials for himself or occasionally to cancel appointments and to make new ones. Only for the supreme order, general. Okay, this is only for the supreme order did he need his Majesty's greatest resolution, and therefore he had to suggest it to the emperor beforehand. So therefore, only these kind of things, the general Beschluss, okay, supreme orders. Let's see what it says, what the translate would be. Yeah, general, but it doesn't. Supreme orders. So therefore, what is he saying here? That he had all these authorities, all these big things, the big policies. He needed to get the emperor's approval. He needed to get he needed the gracious resolution. The emperor's Majesty's gracious resolution, and therefore had to suggest it beforehand, right? Besides, he had authority to administer and command the army, both in civil and criminal cases, as a person in his own right and through mandated officials. In all the relevant circumstances and occasions involved in this business, but he had to do so only in accordance with law, so that he had all this power, but he himself had to do it in light of not only the right of his mandated officials, but in terms of not only as a person in his own right or through his official right. So he had his personal authority as well to do this, but through the law, according to the law, right? He was made General Oblitzer in charge. Okay, this is a weird word. How is this? Okay, person General Oblitzer in charge of provisions and munitions, right? In other words, okay, he was in charge of the supplies and things of this. He had to produce that he had to procure as needed according to the formula as we to the formula as we ourselves would do if we were present and decided, procured and managed in person. So that, in other words, in terms of the emperor, it was used. This thing was the emperor gave to him this responsibility as though if I was there, the emperor was there, right? In person to do this. He had all the powers. In other words, provisions he had to pursue as needed according to the rules, formula to the rules, as we ourselves were there present, right? In the sense. Here, the old formula of the empowerment of commissioners reappears. So, therefore, in this act here, this is like is a commission. He was at one level granted a commission, right, of the emperor. Therefore, all the employees, senior officials, colonels, and officers, and even commissars, junior officers, sergeants, and ministers of support, and accountants were encouraged to obey the true commander in chief and to show him respect. And they had to carry out all his orders, written or orals, general or particular, as if we ordered them and commanded these things ourselves. Here again, we encounter the commissarial formula. So in other words, again, another thing, this idea that he was saying that he had to be obeyed in this, as even all these people had to obey him and show him respect as in these orders, whether written or oral, general or particular, as if the emperor himself ordered them, right? Wallenstein was given absolute power, authority, and sovereignty over all matters listed here. Any form of resistance was threatened with inevitable imperial capital punishment. So therefore, in other words, he was given this power, in the sense of this aspect of this. Wallenstein's authority was therefore of a purely military nature, right? He had no command over imperial armada, so in other words, the armada of the navy, right? There is no doubt that even as commander-in-chief, he had no absolute authority in the sense of total command over military operations, as if the emperor had ceased to be commander-in-chief. In other words, emperor was still commander-in-chief. In other words, he had no absolute real authority. Now, he was, even though he had all these powers, he did not replace the emperor in terms of being the emperor was really the commander-in-chief. So he had all these powers, as if the emperor was there. But these were like in the way that, as Schmitt was saying, the kind of like almost commissarial in that sense, right? That was always emphasized by the emperor when the Estates of the Reich complained. Furthermore, Wallenstein frequently appealed to the emperor, who granted orders directly, and without the emperor's particular ordinance for the instruction of 1625. Wallenstein was not allowed to penetrate into any territory other than the one that Ernst Mansfield. In other words, Ernst as Mansfield. Now, 64. This is the bit of this Walhalla sticks on page 20. Note number 20, page 20. The Emperor's letter to Wallenstein, dating from 24th December 1625, in which Wallenstein is exhorted to maintain good correspondence with Tilly, makes a reference to the instruction, yet the Emperor does not deem it necessary to continue his interposition in that sense. Formerly Duke Rudolf Maximilian of Sachsen-Lauenburg orders to stop, for the time being, the muster of the newly recruited people was not issued by Wallenstein, but by the Imperial War Council. The assertion made by Carafes' report that Wallenstein does everything according to his own will is to be understood pragmatically, as intended to prompt the emperor to release Wallenstein from his command. In general, one should pay heed to the fact that it is not possible to apply Wallenstein's army a modern understanding of military discipline. In other words, you need to understand the army, Wallenstein's army, given its private nature and the way it was constructed, it didn't have a centrality. The armies were localized, it didn't have this discipline of a modern army in that sense. In other words, therefore it's wrong to do that. Instances in which officers declared that they were only following orders coming from a superior to their regiment, but would not accept orders given directly by the general, right, in that sense, because this is the way the feudal system and those structures and the divided commissions and loyalties and things like that operate in that sense. Despite the fact that Wallenstein enjoyed the same rights that were usually given to a military commander, protection letters of reference, the right to pardon, to be merciful and release prisoners for ransom. He was not permitted to release noble prisoners, commanders, princes, and members of estates, or engineers and people with the experience of war without a specific imperial decree or commission. Contributions for the maintenance of the army had to be levied in strict conformity with local measures and customs of the area in which the army happened to have encamped, and everything had to be meticulously documented and deducted from the soldiers' pay. The commissars for mustering, payment, and quartering were imperial commissars subject to the imperial court of war, according to the instructions of 27 June 1625. Johann von Agringer's Aldringen, member of the Council of War, was appointed commissar in charge of mustering, payment, and quartering, in order to support Wallenstein to control the full attendance of lieutenants of regiments and look after the warehouses and supplies. In this respect, Wallenstein was truly independent in that sense, right? Because, for example, Wallenstein's instruction to the general commissioner of his army on how to organize the move into winter quarters. The instructions dates from September 26. These matters were later regulated by the commission 21st April 1628, right? So therefore, 2 years later, right? For the choice of a location where the mustering was to take place, an independent deputy commissar had to be appointed. No name is given for this position. It was emphasized that the estate should be spared, hence they could not complain about the consequences of the soldiers' wanton act. Apart from the commissar for the administration of the army and a commissar in charge of mustering, a third commissar was appointed, a political commissar, to be precise, and this was a member of the Aldrich Chamber. This was a member of the Aldrich Chamber, Johann Fichte von Rieck. In consequence, Wallenstein was not short of good advice or without political counsel, in that sense, concilia, which had to be implemented in conformity with the statutes of the Roman Empire, right? Wallenstein had to use in the army the advice and recommendations of his commissar of government in all matters concerning the Reich. A special deputy of the emperor, who was not officially called commissar, but was in fact involved in commissary activity, was to organize the secret service. In other words, this idea, this next thing, the fourth thing, right? This secret service, in that sense, organize this. And finally, a fifth kind of commissarial matters was mentioned, namely those who were sent by Wallenstein himself to win hearts and negotiate with the people by using political means in a gentle manner, right? So therefore, in order to make difficult circumstances bearable and to restrain the soldiers from looting and excess by paying them appropriately, so that the poor subjects were not unnecessarily oppressed, right? So therefore, this is 66. The commissars who were sent by Wallenstein as military commanders must be distinguished from the commissars, among them the superior Saint Julian in particular, whom he sent in the capacity as territorial lord to receive the tribute paid by the estates. The commissars who were sent by Wallenstein sealed contract with the estates, received imperial jurisdiction, authorization from him. See, for example, Forrester, and Wallenstein's commission is brief. It's that, okay. So let's go back here. According, Wallenstein was not independent either from the administration of the army or from political. So he wasn't purely independent. In other words, Wallenstein was not a sovereign, not an independent actor in a sense. He was under imperial authority. He had what? He had to was not independent either from the administration of the army, in that sense, or from political matters. Gradually, as his actual political impact grew, His own views gained significance in political affairs, but still, on 29th October 1625, he wrote that the emperor had to issue him with a command about how far he was allowed to go in the case of negotiations out of courtesy and other military means, because I do not feel competent to master the political consequences. On number 67, this is Hoelzl. For negotiations of peace, Wallenstein was temporarily vested with special powers and appointed imperial commissar. So, in other words, in the case of the negotiations and stuff at 29 October 65, he was granted even more vested with special powers and appointed imperial commissar. In the transfer of military command, a commissarial mandate was created. The concluding instruction declared that not everything could be said within the limits of such instruction. One had to leave it to the loyalty, vigilance, and military experience of the commander, especially when several occasions had been lost, and he had to ask for advice in every instance. In other words, prudence. Okay, I can't. Everything cannot be addressed in this, because everything can't be addressed in this, there might be some things that are opportunities or occasions that would that are that may be missed if he has to wait for imperial exact specific instructions from the emperor to do this. So therefore, he was given authority in these situations to do such things, right? So there's within the concluding instrument. Okay. For negotiations of peace, Wallenstein was temporarily vested with the special bond appointed commissioner, right? Again, in that sense. Um, Again, this repeat the transfer of military command to commissaries created. And the transfer of military command, a commissary mandate was created, right? In that sense, the concluding instruction declared that not everything could be said within the limits of structure. One had to leave it in the loyalty of the commander, right? Because what happens, because especially when several occasions had been lost, and he had to ask for advice in every instance, the commander of the army had to direct his orders towards establishing peace, right? His goal was to establish peace and control. He had to defend by means permitted by God and international law the rights of the emperor and of the right constitution, of religious peace and of peace in the country and obedience in the estates and the people. In a turn of phrase that is typical of the commissarial endeavor, it was left to Wallenstein's discretion to take every measure here and now and according to the specific circumstances, to command and demand everything that he deems necessary to fulfill the emperor's will. The only question that arose is to what uh, extent it was allowed to breach the existing legal system in the interest of the matter, in concrete situations, in essence. In other words, how far did this mandate reach? The question is the limit. And this is how Schmitt is saying that, okay, he was given powers, given these things. The question now, the only question here, he says, the only question that arises in this period of Mansfield's activity, Wallerstein's activity, was what? Well, to the degree that he could breach existing legal systems in order to achieve what he was had to do, right? In the concrete situation. And how far did his mandate reach? Despite his actual and real power, Wallenstein was only a commanding general at his first assembly of generals, because in reality the military operation was always directed towards his military aims, so that it could take into account any other conditions. In this case, too, a, sim- a situation frequently occurred in which Wallerstein could be portrayed as a dictator, In other words, as a dictator of commission entrusted with absolute powers, that is, powers defined only in relation to his goal. In other words, this is, he was a commission. He had this sense of a dictatorship in this sense, and he had a goal. He had powers in this situation that occurred frequently, in which Wallenstein portrayed a dictator, that is a dictator of commission, entrusted with absolute powers, in order that were and those powers only were defined by the goal. But according to his legal status, he was not a dictator, as the emperor had given him special instructions tailored to the fulfillment of a special task. The management of the army, as such, ductus extras, right? This led the army. Okay, was not in a prince's remit, except for matters of military jurisprudence regarded by the army as internal. The supreme command vested with the emperor himself, who was entitled to issue interpositions, like commands, ultimate, rules of things, things to be interrupt and do interpositions. Wallenstein was explicitly not entitled to interfere with the rights of third parties, so he was explicitly not entitled to write this thing. He was ordered to follow the traditional laws and customs, and to raise contributions only in conformity with existing regulations. So he wasn't given absolute power. In other words, he was ordered to obey the regulations, customs, and rules that he was under. The two legal notes set by the emperors came into effect 24 August 1630 and were entrusted to Wallenstein. They informed him that ordinary help from the counties had to support the militia, and that the emperor had strictly limited powers, defined by the Constitution of the Reich, the Reich Constitution, in that sense. Everything that exceeded the limit, the limit determined by the law was deemed to be an attack, a mere factual violence, via effect, by way of fact, right? By way of fact occurrence, by the way, okay. A be fact occurrence, an occurrence by way of fact, right? So a mere factual violence, occurrence by the way of fact, right? So unusual was the relationship between the emperor and the commander of the troops, that with regard to third parties, and in particular states, the commander of troops was only entitled to do what was in accordance with their right. The emperor's declaration of outlawry, in other words, the emperor's declaration of outlawry against enemies and rebels, created the possibilities of far-reaching confiscation. So, therefore, in other words, it was not that he did it himself under these things, but rather only through the law, but because what happened? In other words, Wallenstein wasn't doing this because he was doing these things that needed the powers. He was strictly limited by what the law said. It was the emperor's declaration of outlaw against enemies and rebels created the legal possibilities of far-reaching confiscations. But not even that constituted a change to the existing law. That's what it is. In other words, even this president, the emperor's declaring outlaw, didn't alter the law. Of course, the emperor tried once more to test the plenitudes of power in relation to the state of emergency in war, and to turn it from sacralum into genuine absolute power, plenitudes, fullness of power, absolute total power, right? Fullness of power. He might have empowered Wallenstein to take measures imposed by the conquered situation without regard for the laws that forbade it. In other words, he could have done this. In other words, of course, the emperor tried once more to test this question of the plenitude of his imperial powers in relationship to the emergency, right? And to turn it from the sacralum to a genuine, from this kind of claim, this let's say exactly, let me see. The image, the image of this plenitude of power to a genuine real powers. He might have given him the measures, empowered Washington to take measures imposed by the situation without regard to law that forbade it. Then Wallenstein would really have been a commissar of action and a commissarial dictator. But this is exactly what the emperor did not do. He he considered the estate's complaints about Wallenstein's encroachment to be legally justified. However, Wallenstein's military successes earned the emperor such powers that the possibility of the German Reich having become a unified national state under the absolute prince may have seemed real for a moment. The most important practical prerequisite for such an impression would have been a unification of the two armies, that of the emperor and that of the League, under the emperor's supreme command. So, in other words, the creation of a unified military. In other words, and he's saying here is that there was a moment, that in other words, his military successes earned the emperor much power, that it was possible creating a unified national state, a unitary state, in that sense. By unifying the armies under one order, one structure, one administration, one rule. So therefore, the League's army and the emperor, that of the emperor and that of the League, under the emperor's command. And this was indeed the objective of the imperial proposal for the conjunction of the two armies, which was made the 5th September 1630. But the most important reason advanced among a number of other arguments was that such a unification would rob Protestant estates of a pretext to maintain an army of their own, and since the Catholic League was also having one. But the Catholic princes were far from allowing full imperial powers over war and peace to become a form of real sovereignty. So even the Catholic princes weren't willing to unify all things. And the Protestants said, "Oh no, this means we won't have an army anymore." Oh no, because the Catholics have one, okay. But now even the Catholic ones were saying, no, this means I'm going to lose my power, right? The princes cared about their power in that sense. They raised against Wallenstein the important objection that they could not surrender to a commander of troops for the sake of their status not being compared with his, in that sense. That they were higher in that sense. Moreover, he was always referring to authority. He was always referring to the authority of the emperor. He did not take this estate seriously, and he was too quick to see military executions as a solution. In other words, this is the complaints against him. That he was always referring to the authority of the emperor. He did not take the estate seriously. He was too quick to see military executions as solutions. The emperor responded to these objections by stating that His Imperial Majesty is himself, His Imperial Majesty himself is the captain of the army. Right, so he is the Kaiserlich Majesty, Sin Incula Admont, the captain of the Armada, right? The declaration of the colleges of the Prince Electors dating from 4 September 1630 clearly said the Prince Elector of Bavaria had to be given general command over the emperor's army, and that the existing illegal situation had to be resolved. The document also demanded that the emperor restrain via the auspices for the army, and the supreme military decision for this command, but only in the terms and conditions for capitulation specified in the Constitution of the Reich, and in conformity with customary practices. The emperor, the declaration of the College of the Prince Electors, right? They stated that this elector was given the Prince Elector was given command over the emperor's army, and that this other thing to be doing, and they had demand that the emperors retain the auspices for the army, the auspicia, the auspices for the army, and the supreme military decision for his command, right? His command, the Richtfeldhauptmannschaft, the field cap. What is this word? Of course, German is always pain in the ass in that sense. The Reichsfeldkapitän, right? But only in terms and conditions for the capitulations defined in the constitutions, right? Of the Reich and in conformity with practices. The emperor's desire to unify two armies was commented upon with the remarks that the League did not violate the constitution of the Reich and that without its support, the emperor would lose everything he had gained up to then. Of course, the army should be unified, but under the command of the Prince Elector of Bavaria, whereby his imperial majesty and highness would be in no way challenged. In fact, it would be stabilized. Right, this idea 42. So therefore, this idea, instead of Wallenstein doing it, the High Elector, the Prince Elector of Bavaria. It is well known that, in spite of the imperial councils of support for the idea of imperial plenitude of powers, the dispute ended with the complete victory of the interest of the prince electors over the imperial interest, right? So therefore, after Wallenstein's dismissal, the imperial commander was told to accept direct orders only from the emperor, right? One part of the army was dismissed and another placed under Tilly's command, right, the League's command. As for Wallenstein's second generalship as supreme commander, December 1631 to February 1634, right? Okay, we're going to stop here. We're going to stop. This is where I'm stopping. Okay, so we looked at the first part. Today we're going to just look at the first part of command, and then this will be part one, and part B will finish up. We'll look at the second generalship of Wallenstein and the implications of whether it was a dictatorship. What kind of dictatorship? How did it relate to this question of commissarial office? Was it how did it function to shape this understand this power in this debate? So if you have any questions or comments, please put them below. And if I see them, when I see them, I will respond to them. This has been very difficult. I can see why people. This is very technical, and it is very technical. This is Schmitt at his most deep. He's giving the historical analysis of this. He's structuring the historic analysis of this, and he's giving this framework and legal frameworks of how executive authority evolved in the sense how the historic situation of this crisis and the way the emperor utilized or tried to attempt to centralize his conception of powers, right? The unified power, the rise of absolute power, centralize the modern state in that sense. That's the Constitution theory, right? The creation of the feudal, the move from remember, this is if we use the language of Schmitt's legality and legitimacy, this is the medieval state was jurisdictional states, right? The feudal estates and the question of estates here was jurisdictional states. And what the emperor was trying to do with this was to overcome the jurisdictions and to unify authority in that sense. So that's the absolute. So therefore, using the language of the movement of the forms of constitutional authority from the medieval jurisdictional state to that of the absolutist state, right? This move there, this shift. This is this discussion of the shift from the feudal state, to the rise of the absolutist state, or the centralized administrative state, the centralized where all powers and centralization are there. So again, if you have any comments, questions, please put it there. If you like it, hit like button, please, like button. If you've not subscribed, share it with friends, share it with your buddies, post it, spread the news. If you've not subscribed, and get others to subscribe. We're kind of frozen in a sort of thing. If you didn't like it, okay, of course you can say no, but say why in the comments. Maybe we can do something better. Yes, you can say, oh yeah, but your German is horrible. Your pronunciation is horrible. Yes, okay, true, yes. Oh, this is going to be very bad. Again, this is. I can understand why many people are not going to be watching this video because it's a very technical. And we're going to read. We're reading through this as kind of a very close way to understand what Schmitt is up to. Um, If you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. If you want to see my see my links to academic social media and my scholarship and things like that, links are below. If you want to help me do what I do, you can financially assist it like this. You can do it through Patreon or Subscribe Star. Links are below, or you can do so by buying one of my books. Again, the book titles are below. You can buy it at Amazon or any online source. I didn't direct you to specific sources because I felt like it'd be better not to. You have a choice, or you can use your local bookstore if you want to. Okay, we'll see you next time. We'll look at the next video here, and we'll turn to the conclusion of B. Wallenstein's second generalship. Take care. Again, this is Thursdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we will be finishing Rousseau soon. So therefore, we'll probably be doing some more Rousseau in terms of the political economy. So that's Monday, Wednesday, and of course our normal Friday, whatever we do, either live stream or potluck. All right. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good day.